Welcome to Deep Dive Stoic. I'm glad you're here because what we're about to cover might just shift how you see yourself and how others see you. Here's the truth. Truly intelligent men have learned something most people never do. It's not about always having the right answer. It's about knowing when not to speak at all. Sometimes the smartest thing you can say is nothing, because what you choose not to say reveals more about your character than any clever quote or impressive story ever could. I've spent years studying human behavior through the lens of Stoic philosophy, and one pattern is clear. The wisest men don't waste words. They don't rush to defend themselves, and they don't say things that quietly damage their discipline, their mindset, or their reputation. So today we're breaking down 5 things intelligent men never say, not because they're perfect, but because they've learned the hard way that these phrases lead nowhere good. If you want to speak with purpose, lead with clarity, and build quiet strength. Stick around. And if this message resonates with you, consider supporting the channel. Just hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps more people discover these timeless ideas. Let's get into it. 1. I already know that. It sounds harmless, maybe even confident. I already know that. But to an intelligent man, those 4 words are a red flag, not a badge of honor. When someone says, I already know that, what they're really saying is, I've stopped listening. And in the eyes of a Stoic, that's the moment learning ends and ego begins. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in history, wrote in Meditations, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. For it is the truth I seek, and the truth never harmed anyone." Think about that. The emperor of Rome, with access to the best minds of his time, still welcomed correction. He still saw himself as a student of life. Now compare that to the modern man who interrupts a conversation with, "Yeah, I know that already." It might feel like confidence, but it's usually fear. Fear of not looking smart enough, fear of appearing behind, fear of being exposed. But what's actually being exposed is pride, and pride is the very thing Stoicism teaches us to control. I learned this lesson the hard way. Years ago, I was working with someone who had decades of experience, calm, measured, sharp. We were reviewing a system I thought I had already mastered. He began explaining a small detail I had overlooked, and without thinking, I cut him off. I already know that. He stopped mid-sentence, not angry, just quiet. He nodded and moved on. But I felt the weight of that moment more than any harsh criticism ever could. That night, it hit me. I didn't just dismiss his words, I dismissed his experience. I closed the door on an opportunity to learn something valuable. Not because I knew everything, but because I didn't want to admit I didn't. And that's what saying, I already know that, really does. It tells the world you're more concerned with protecting your image than expanding your mind. It makes you seem like someone who's not open to growth, and worse, someone who's blind to it. Stoicism calls this out directly. Epictetus reminds us, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." That line cuts deep because it reveals how often we deceive ourselves. We assume that hearing something once means we've mastered it, but repetition, perspective, and context all matter. You might have heard a principle before, but hearing it again with more life behind you might make it land differently. And often it's not the idea that changes, it's you. I once saw a master carpenter, a man in his 60s, listening intently as a young apprentice explained a basic technique. He didn't interrupt. He nodded, asked questions, and even thanked him. Later, I asked him why he did that when he obviously already knew what was being explained. He said, "Because you can always learn something, and sometimes the value isn't in what's being said, it's in how they say it. You get to see how they think." That's intelligence, that's humility, and that's what makes a man wise. The ability to hold back your pride just long enough to gain something deeper. In Stoic practice, this is called self-mastery. The power to manage your impulses, especially the subtle ones like the urge to interrupt, correct, or impress. It's not just about being silent, it's about listening with intention. Because a man who listens learns twice, once from the information and once from his own restraint. Let's be honest, we all fall into this trap. We hear advice we've heard before and we tune out. We assume we've squeezed everything we can out of a lesson just because we've encountered it once. But wisdom doesn't work like that. It's not a checklist, it's a lifelong practice. Think about reading Meditations when you're 20, then again at 40. It's the same book, but you're a different person. and that makes the lesson feel brand new. That's why intelligent men don't dismiss familiar truths. They revisit them, reflect on them, and extract new meaning each time. And it goes deeper than just learning. Saying, "I already know that," in a conversation shuts people down. It signals that you're not open, not just to new ideas, but to connection. When you shut down someone's effort to share, you don't just close your own mind. You close the door between you and them. Intelligent men know that even if they've heard it before, there's value in listening. Maybe they'll gain a new insight. Maybe they'll encourage someone who's trying to contribute. Or maybe they'll simply practice humility, which in itself is a form of wisdom. And if nothing else, they earn respect. Because people remember how you made them feel when they were vulnerable enough to speak. A man who listens when he doesn't have to builds trust. A man who says, "I already know that," builds walls. So the next time you feel that reflex rising, the urge to interrupt, to correct, to show that you've already been there, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, am I trying to learn or trying to protect my ego? Because intelligent men aren't afraid of learning something they already know. They welcome it. They know that every perspective, no matter how familiar, carries the potential to reveal something new. And even if it doesn't, they understand that humility, real, quiet humility, is never wasted. That's the Stoic way. Stay curious, stay open, and never let your ego talk you out of a lesson. 2. That's impossible. There's a phrase that intelligent men almost never use, and that phrase is, "That's impossible." At first it sounds reasonable, logical even, a quick way to shut down bad ideas or protect yourself from wasting time. But when you peel it back, "That's impossible" doesn't reflect wisdom. It reveals limitation. And Stoicism is a philosophy built on expanding your control, not shrinking your potential. When a man says, "That's impossible," he's often not describing the situation. He's describing his own mindset. He's revealing the limits he's placed on what he's willing to try, risk, or believe. I once worked with someone who did this constantly. Every new idea, no matter how practical or promising, was met with the same phrase, "That'll never work." And it wasn't just skepticism. It was a deep fear of the unknown, a fear of failure disguised as realism. Stoic philosopher Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." That's what was happening here. This man wasn't analyzing the facts. He was reacting to fear. The fear of not having control. The fear of trying and coming up short. So instead of exploring the challenge, he shut it down. But intelligent men, men trained in discipline and logic, respond differently. They don't deny reality, but they don't surrender to fear either. When they hear something that sounds difficult, their first question isn't, "Is it impossible?" It's, "What's possible within my control?" This is where Stoicism shines. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's more than a quote. It's a strategy. Because no matter how difficult something appears, a Stoic man doesn't focus on the entire mountain. He focuses on the next step. Years ago, I faced a challenge that felt completely overwhelming. Tight deadlines, limited resources, a lack of experience from everyone involved. Every voice around me said the same thing. There's no way this is going to work. And I felt it too. The fear, the doubt, the temptation to say, "That's impossible." But I paused. I reminded myself of what I could control. My effort, my preparation, my attitude. I didn't have to believe in the entire solution. I just had to move one step forward. That project ended up being one of the most successful things I've ever worked on. Not because we got lucky, not because it suddenly became easy, but because we refused to let the scale of the problem paralyze us. That's the danger of the phrase, "That's impossible." It makes you freeze. It convinces you that if you can't see the entire path, you shouldn't take the first step. But in Stoicism, you learn that the first step is everything. Every day you are faced with challenges, in your work, your relationships, your goals. Some will seem too big, too far, too uncertain. But intelligent men, Stoic men, that don't ask, "Can I do everything?" They ask, "What can I do today?" Because the truth is, most impossible things aren't impossible at all. They're just unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things feel dangerous to the brain. But feeling unsafe and actually being unsafe are two very different things. I've met people who rebuilt their entire lives after loss. I've seen men get sober after decades of addiction. I've watched quiet underdogs start businesses from scratch, learn new languages in their 40s, or finally stand up for themselves after years of silence. None of those things were possible on paper, but they became possible the moment those men stopped saying it was impossible. One of the most powerful aspects of Stoicism is its focus on perception. As Epictetus put it, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The obstacle, the delay, the failure, none of these things are final unless you label them that way. And when you say, that's impossible, you're not labeling the event. You're labeling yourself. That phrase becomes a mirror, reflecting your limits, not reality. Now let's be clear. Intelligent men don't lie to themselves. They know that not everything will work. They recognize danger, risk, and probability. But there's a difference between evaluating a situation and closing the door on it. Saying, that's unlikely, still leaves room for strategy. Saying, that's difficult, opens the door for growth. But that's impossible? That's surrender. And intelligent men do not surrender to fear disguised as logic. Think of the Stoic warrior, calm in the storm, not because the battle is easy, but because he's focused on his training, focused on his breath, focused on what he can do right now. That's the mindset that turns the impossible into progress. So the next time you're tempted to say, that's impossible, pause. Ask yourself, is it truly impossible or just hard? Just uncertain? Just uncomfortable? Because discomfort is the beginning of every great achievement. The man who avoids it avoids growth. But the man who accepts it, he becomes unshakable. You don't have to see the whole path. You just have to stop standing still. The Stoic way is not about hoping things get easier. It's about becoming strong enough to face them even when they don't. And that kind of strength begins with language, so remove "that's impossible" from your vocabulary. Not because everything will go your way, but because you are more powerful than your fear wants you to believe. 3. That's not my fault. There's a sentence that slips out of people's mouths almost automatically. That's not my fault. It sounds like self-defense. It sounds like you're protecting yourself from being blamed. But to an intelligent man, a man who lives by Stoic values, those 4 words reveal something deeper, a desire to escape responsibility. And that's a dangerous thing. See, blaming others might feel good in the moment. It takes the pressure off. It shifts the spotlight away from you. But here's the problem. The moment you refuse responsibility, you also give up power. And no intelligent man willingly gives up power over his own life. Epictetus said it best. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Stoicism isn't about pretending everything is your fault. It's about recognizing that your response, your attitude, your actions, your decisions, are always within your control. When something goes wrong, most people rush to explain why it wasn't their doing. The team let me down. I wasn't given the right tools. The client changed their mind. And sure, sometimes those things are true. But the Stoic mindset doesn't stop at truth. It asks, what can I take responsibility for anyway? Intelligent men don't look for a way out. They look for a way forward. I remember a situation where a close friend lost a major opportunity. A business deal collapsed. His team failed to deliver on time. The market shifted. And he was quick to say, that wasn't my fault. On paper, he was right. But while he was listing all the external reasons for the failure, something else was happening. He was learning nothing. Because if it's not your fault, then there's nothing to change, right? Nothing to improve, nothing to examine. That mindset creates stagnation. Over time, he kept repeating the same mistakes, convinced he just had bad luck or unreliable people. But the truth was, he refused to look inward, and without that inner reflection, he stayed stuck. Now compare that to a man who owns even a small part of the problem. Maybe he says, you're right, I didn't communicate clearly enough. Or, next time I'll double-check the deadlines myself. That's not weakness. That's leadership. That's intelligence. That's a man who's interested in getting better, not just looking blameless. And here's the real power of that shift. When you take responsibility, you reclaim control. You're no longer waiting for other people to fix the situation. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't rely on others to change before you can move forward. You take charge. You become active instead of passive. And over time, that mindset builds confidence because you're no longer at the mercy of the world. You know that even when things go wrong, you still have the ability to respond with strength and clarity. The Stoics were relentless about this idea. They believed that greatness came not from avoiding problems, but from meeting them with discipline and courage. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That includes the excuses we make. Even when they feel justified, excuses are easy. Responsibility is hard, but responsibility is also where transformation begins. Let me be clear. Accepting responsibility doesn't mean you blame yourself for things outside your control. It means you stay focused on what you can influence. Your decisions, your preparation, your reactions. And even when the external world is chaotic, you remain grounded in your internal strength. I've learned this the hard way in my own life. There were times I wanted to shift the blame, times when failure hit me hard, and the easiest thing to say was, "That wasn't my fault." But every time I said it, I felt weaker, not stronger. Because deep down I knew I was waiting for someone else to clean up the mess, someone else to change so I could move forward. That's not Stoicism, that's avoidance. The moment I began saying, "This part was on me," everything shifted. I became more intentional, I became more respected, and most importantly, I became more capable, because I was no longer outsourcing my future to someone else. Here's something worth remembering. People trust the man who owns his mistakes, not the one who dodges blame. When you take responsibility, even for the smallest part, you build credibility. You show character, and you demonstrate that you're not just reacting to life, you're shaping it. In a world full of finger-pointing and excuses, an intelligent man stands out by taking ownership. He doesn't waste time defending his ego. He puts that energy into improving, growing, and leading, not just himself, but the people around him. And when something goes wrong, he doesn't jump to blame. He pauses and reflects. He asks himself what role he played, not to beat himself up, but to get better. He understands that the path to wisdom always starts with the question, what could I have done differently? Because the man who takes responsibility doesn't need perfect conditions. He creates progress wherever he stands. And that's what separates an intelligent man from the rest. Not how often he avoids failure, but how deeply he learns from it. 4. I don't need any help. One of the most damaging lies a man can tell himself is this: I don't need any help. At first glance it sounds noble, independent, strong. It's the kind of phrase that's been glamorized in movies, in business culture, even in how we're raised. We're told to handle things ourselves, to never show weakness, to grit our teeth, push through, and prove that we can carry it all on our own. But here's the truth Stoicism reveals. Refusing help isn't strength. It's pride. Quiet, subtle, and often invisible to the man who holds it, pride convinces us that struggle should be silent, that asking for help makes us less capable, that leaning on someone else is a sign we've somehow failed to be enough. But nothing could be further from the truth. Let's be clear, self-reliance is important. The Stoics believed deeply in cultivating personal strength, but they'd never confuse that with isolation. In fact, Marcus Aurelius, arguably one of the strongest, most powerful men in human history, openly acknowledged the debt he owed to others. In Meditations, he lists the names of mentors, teachers, friends, and family members who shaped his thinking and guided his character. If the Emperor of Rome didn't do it alone, why should we? The belief that I don't need any help is not strength. It's fear disguised as strength. A fear of appearing vulnerable, a fear of losing control, a fear of being seen not as the man who has it all together, but as someone who, like everyone else, has limits. And intelligent men, truly wise men, know that acknowledging your limits is the first step toward mastering them. I remember a time in my life when I was juggling too much. I was building something that mattered to me, and I was determined to do it all myself. I kept telling myself, this is what strong men do. They figure it out. So I stayed up later, took on more, pushed through the exhaustion, and when people offered to help, I smiled and said, I've got it. But behind that smile was stress, fatigue, quiet frustration. I was burning out and I didn't even realize it, until one day a friend looked me in the eye and said, you're trying so hard not to need anyone. You're forgetting that people want to help you, and you're not letting them. That moment stuck with me, because it reminded me of something the Stoics knew well. We are not meant to walk through life alone. We are social creatures by nature. We're designed for cooperation, mutual support, and shared wisdom. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And part of mastering yourself is mastering your pride, especially the kind that keeps you from reaching out when you need to. Stoicism doesn't ask you to become dependent, but it does challenge you to become honest. And sometimes the most honest thing you can say is, "I need help." That takes courage. The same kind of courage it takes to admit when you're wrong, to start over, or to face your own weaknesses. I've seen this truth play out in the strongest men I know. Leaders, fathers, creators, thinkers. The ones who earn deep respect aren't the ones who pretend they never struggle. They're the ones who admit it, who ask questions, who surround themselves with people who sharpen them. And when they ask for help, something powerful happens. They don't lose respect. They gain it. Because people see their humility, their wisdom, their willingness to grow, not just succeed. There's a story I've always remembered about Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. He's often portrayed as stoic and solitary, but in reality he was surrounded by what historians call a team of rivals, men who challenged him, debated him, and gave him counsel, not because he lacked confidence, but because he valued clarity more than control. That's what intelligent men do. They don't surround themselves with yes men. They seek truth, perspective, and strength from others, not because they're weak, but because they know strength multiplies when shared. Now think about your own life. How many times have you struggled in silence just to protect an image? How many opportunities for growth, connection, or relief have you passed up because you didn't want to be seen needing anything? That's not discipline. That's pride in disguise. And over time, it doesn't just wear you down. It cuts you off from the very people who could lift you higher. So here's the shift. The next time you catch yourself thinking, "I don't need any help," take a moment and be honest with yourself. Ask if you're protecting your progress or just hiding behind the idea of appearing strong. Ask if you're trying to prove something to others, or if you're holding back out of fear of looking weak. And most importantly, ask what might happen, what good could come, if you allowed someone to support you, even just a little. Because here's the paradox of Stoicism. The man who embraces interdependence, not codependence, becomes more powerful. Not because he's leaning on others forever, but because he's building something larger than himself. And that's real strength, knowing you're part of something bigger, knowing when to stand alone and when to stand together. The wisest men don't isolate themselves. They lead, they listen, and yes, they accept help when it's needed. Because they understand that courage isn't just facing the world head on. It's also letting someone stand beside you when the weight is too heavy to carry alone. So if you've been telling yourself, "I don't need anyone," maybe it's time to ask if that belief is truly making you stronger, or if it's quietly holding you back. Let the armor go. You're strong enough to ask, and wise enough to grow. 5. I'll do it later. There's a phrase that destroys more potential than fear, doubt, or even failure, and it sounds so harmless, so casual. I'll do it later. But Stoic men, truly intelligent men, know better. They understand that later is a trap, a false comfort, a slow erosion of discipline disguised as planning. "I'll do it later" feels productive. It tricks you into thinking you've made a decision, that the task is already handled, just not now. But in truth, all you've done is delay it. You haven't taken a step forward. You've simply pushed the weight onto your future self, and hoped he'll be stronger, braver, or more focused than you are right now. The Stoics taught urgency, not recklessness, but presence. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You could leave life right now." Let that determine what you do and say and think. That's not meant to be dark. It's meant to wake you up, because we are all living under the illusion of time. We assume we'll always have tomorrow, next week, next year. But intelligent men know, you only have now. I knew a man named Thomas, smart, driven, respected. He had a successful career, a close family, and a father who was growing old. They used to fish together, talk for hours. But as the business demands piled up, Thomas kept saying the same thing. "I'll go see him next week. We'll reschedule that trip. When things settle down, we'll make time." But life didn't wait. One day, without warning, his father passed away. No goodbye, no last conversation, just silence. Thomas later told me the worst part wasn't the grief. It was the regret. He hadn't lost time, He had given it away piece by piece, each time he said, "I'll do it later." That story has stayed with me for years, because I've seen it happen in so many forms: the call you didn't make, the apology you didn't offer, the book you didn't write, the dream you kept postponing because life was too busy right now. But here's the truth: life will always be busy. Circumstances will never be perfect. There will never be a better time. That's why the wise don't wait. They act. Stoicism teaches that procrastination is a form of avoidance, not just of action, but of truth. When you delay something important, you're not just avoiding effort, you're avoiding clarity. You're avoiding the discomfort of confronting something head-on. It might be a conversation that scares you, a project that feels overwhelming, a change that will stretch you, but the longer you wait, the heavier it gets. And what once required courage will eventually require a miracle, because your mind will inflate the task until it feels impossible. I've been there myself. I've delayed conversations because I didn't want the conflict. I've pushed off goals because I feared failure. I told myself, I just need more time. But all I was doing was building a wall between myself and progress, and every "I'll do it later" was another brick in that wall. Eventually, I realized something. Later is where dreams go to die. And Stoicism calls us to something higher. Marcus Aurelius didn't write down philosophical reflections to impress others. He wrote them to remind himself to wake up, to act now, to live with purpose, and to never take time for granted. Because nothing is promised. Not your relationships, not your health, not your opportunities. The man who waits loses. But the man who moves, even slowly, even imperfectly, gains momentum. So let me ask you, what have you been putting off? What phone call, what habit, what change has been sitting in the back of your mind, waiting for the right moment? What have you convinced yourself you'll get to someday? Whatever it is, make a decision today. Not to finish it, maybe, but to begin. Because motion creates clarity, action builds discipline, and every time you follow through, especially when you don't feel like it, you build something unshakable, self-respect. And that's what intelligent men really protect. Not their comfort, not their image, but their integrity. There's a kind of quiet power in doing the thing you've been avoiding. It rewires how you see yourself. You stop being the man who waits, and you become the man who follows through. So the next time you hear that voice whisper, "I'll do it later," pause, and remind yourself, later isn't real. Only now is. Because what you choose to do today shapes who you become tomorrow. And when you live that way, urgently, intentionally, and with discipline, regret doesn't stand a chance. That's the Stoic path. That's the intelligent path. And it begins, not with someday, but right now. If you've made it this far, then you're already doing something most people never will. You're choosing to think deeper, live more intentionally, and challenge your own habits. And that alone puts you on the path of wisdom. Now, maybe you've heard yourself in one or more of these 5 phrases. Maybe you've said, "I already know that," or "That's not my fault," or "I'll do it later." We all have. These aren't signs of weakness, they're signs that you're human. But what separates an intelligent man from the rest isn't that he never slips, it's that he catches himself, and he decides to do better. That's what Stoicism teaches us. We're not here to be perfect, we're here to grow. And that growth begins the moment we become aware of what we say, what we think, and how we respond, not just to the world, but to ourselves. Language is powerful. The words we use reflect the thoughts we carry. And over time, those thoughts shape our actions and our lives. When you stop saying, "That's impossible," you begin to see opportunity. When you stop saying, "That's not my fault," you begin to take back control. And when you stop saying, "I'll do it later," you finally take action. In the only moment that truly matters, now. The Stoic life is a disciplined one, but it's not cold. It's not rigid. It's grounded in clarity, courage, and a commitment to truth, even when that truth is uncomfortable, especially then. And that's the kind of man you're becoming. One choice, one phrase, one conversation at a time. So if this video sparked something in you, if even one of these lessons challenged you to think differently, then consider supporting this channel. Subscribe. It's free. And it tells the algorithm that this kind of content matters, that there are still men out there hungry for depth, discipline, and timeless wisdom. And if you know someone who's walking this path too, a friend, a brother, someone trying to level up in silence, share this video with them. Let them know they're not alone, because this community isn't just about watching Stoic content, it's about living it quietly, consistently, and together. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.